Okay, well, I think if I make a start then, and if Paul joins us, then he can introduce himself and take over. So welcome everyone for attending. I think actually before we start the hearing the evidence today, I have to propose that Baroness Fraser of Craig Maddy be formally appointed as an officer of this APPG, and I need approval from the parliamentarians on this call. So if you can shout out now if you approve that.
Agreed.
Thanks,
Thank
Ian.
you.
Okay, nobody got any disapproval, so we'll take that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so also can I ask people if they're going on social media to tweet using the hashtag APPGONCP. And I'm also just going to update you on the progress since the last meeting. So myself and Paul Maynard have written to the Minister for Care to ask for an update on NHS England's implementation of our early identification report. And the APPG has met with the Early Years Healthy Development Review team to see if there's any aspect of the report that can inform their work. And I'm sure I shall update you once we have the relevant responses. I've got a feeling Paul has just joined. I see that at the top.
I have. My apologies for being late.
Absolutely fine, Paul. I'm just doing the introductions. And I'll just set the scene for the meeting now. Okay, so as we know, school is a remarkable time in any child's life, and their experience in the classroom is intended to set them up for the rest of their life. However, despite cerebral palsy being the most common motor disability in childhood, the experience of children with the condition and their families in the education system varies widely. So in this session, the APPG here are going to hear from speakers in the field of inclusive education and about how best practice can be shared across all settings to benefit children with cerebral palsy and help to give them the best start in life.
And then the next bit, I think, is me, which I'm going to read here. The variations in complications, degree of disability and symptoms mean that every child with CP has truly unique needs and abilities. So we can't really have a one-size-fits-all solution in teaching. So teachers in any setting take account of variations and ensure the child is actually included so they can really know what works for her or him. And this requires better collaboration between parents, where families all too often excluded from conversations around their child's needs early in life, need to give their advice to educators, tackling emerging symptoms and complications with the condition. Methods of instruction need to be adjusted. Every child learns differently, and those with CB require more nuance than most in how they are taught. This might be direct instruction, hands-on learning, or the use of multimedia. Pupils also need to help connect with those who have a different learning style, maybe different forms of media, or reaching for a book. Technology, of course, is key to this, as we all know, but it can really level the playing field in a classroom environment. Those using personal response devices that will allow every pupil to contribute to questions and discussions. Finally, of course, there's the issue, sadly, of bullying. Teachers have to ensure there's a no-tolerance approach and a safe environment against all forms of bullying behaviour. This should come from their school's leaders, setting out a clear policy aimed at tackling physical, verbal and other negative forms of behaviour. The classroom must be an inclusive environment for all children. I think we can all agree with that, and I should put in a little ad right now for the APPG on assistive and augmentative technology, which is dealing with many of these issues that I've just referred to, and that's meeting very soon. So If you want to know more about that, just put a note in the conversation. Anyway, enough of me. It's over to Martin Ingram, who's the principal at Trelaws, and he's going to speak for a few minutes, then introduce one of his students. So over to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Can you all hear me okay? I've got my mask on. Yeah. Okay, so I'm the principal of Trelaws School and College. We're in Hampshire. We have approximately 170 young people here, ranging from a primary school, a secondary school, and a college. And we have, of those 170, about 120 have cerebral palsy. One of the features of Trelaws is that we have day students and residential students here. And I'll be interested to talk a little bit about the advantages of residential provision for some students and how that can contribute to inclusivity. For example, we have a program preparing students for university, if that's appropriate, and those students are more likely to benefit from their university experience if they've had the opportunity here to develop the independent living skills that enable them to thrive and to be able to direct and advocate for their needs when they do move on to the next setting. The other feature I think that would be interesting to discuss is the multidisciplinary team working. And a number of the young people that come to us from either mainstream settings or alternative settings is that coordinating therapy, particularly physio and speech and language therapy and occupational therapy, into the programs of learning to make sure that we offer a very bespoke program focusing on the individual needs of each learner in classes of approximately 7 to 8 really does help maximising outcomes for those young people. I think Rachel probably can explain things better than I can. She's been through some of our years of our school and has started a college program with us, taking a BTEC in level 3 in photography. And again, I'm happy to ask a couple of questions, but it's probably appropriate, perhaps if some of you have got questions you'd like to ask her, I'm happy to pose those for you, or if we can hear clearly enough across Zoom, she can answer those directly herself. One of the things I think we have noticed in the last couple of years is we put an enormous amount of effort into work around multisensory impairment and some of the hidden disability that perhaps isn't identified always when students arrive at Trelaws with a diagnosis of CP and some of the particular challenges that they face. Certainly things like CVI, cortical visual impairment, other issues around perhaps autism and ADHD, which may not have been supported elsewhere, can be supported more directly here and in a very inclusive, highly accessible environment. The accessing facilities, accessing equipment, accessing residential spaces is absolutely crucial for young people to thrive and to give them the confidence and to know what they can expect and what excellent does look like when they do move on to us, whether that's to alternative accommodation, whether it's moving on to further education, university, or indeed to employment or in a volunteering capacity. But I think it's probably appropriate that I listen to what Rachel's got to say. Rachel is fiercely independent of me. My attempts to try and persuade her to answer the questions in a particular way have been appropriately rebuffed. So perhaps over to Rachel, and if I kick her off, and then perhaps if anybody wants to join in. But Rachel, what do you think you've learned from your time about what works and what doesn't work for you here at Trelaws?
What's benefited me the most is learning my independent skills in the residential houses, because as much as I appreciate having my parents and my family do everything for me, I really need to learn the independent skills as I'm going to university in September.
Okay. Can you all hear us okay? We're a little bit far from the microphone. Good. And tell us a bit about those independent skills. What sort of things are you learning in addition to your academic studies? What sort of things are you learning to make you more independent, do you think?
The domestic skills like doing your washing, cooking, cleaning, all sorts of skills really.
Okay, good. Are there any questions anybody's got they'd like to ask Rachel or myself at this point? You can use the chat function, or please do ask via the chair. Yeah, Amanda, sorry.
Yep. sorry, lovely. Rachel, I would really be interested to know, what do you think has been of the most use to you over the years of your education, and what has enabled you to be in the position you are now, to be looking at going off to university? What are the qualities of the teaching and learning do you think that you've most benefited from?
The qualities of the teaching is that the fact that the lesson plans are very like personalised to me and my needs. So if I'm in pain one day and I have to miss a lesson, it doesn't matter because the teacher can reschedule whatever I need to learn.
I should say we are fortunate here. We do have obviously a substantial team of physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and speech and language therapists on site. So students can access that provision throughout the day and also while they're on the residential house. So as Rachel's indicated, if there's a day when perhaps learning is going to be a little bit more challenging for her for various reasons, we can put some therapeutic interventions in place to ensure that education is accessible to her, and we can make it a very bespoke offer. And across a residential setting, a day of residential provision rather, we are able to work outside that core school or college day. And I think that has proved really, really beneficial to some of our students. Home working at particular times of the day can be quite challenging, particularly if it coincides with medication or coincides with other sorts of activity which may interrupt learning in a more traditional sense.
That's what happened when you mute. Baroness Fraser, you have your hand up for a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, I know Treloar is an incredibly special place. In fact, I have to declare an interest because my father-in-law, who is no longer with us, used to be, I think, a trustee of Treloar some years ago. And you were mentioning how it goes through the sort of different stages of education. So it's primary, secondary and college. And I'm wondering, Rachel, I don't know how long you've been at Treloar for, but does that mean that therefore the issues that we see with so many young people who have to go through periods of transition in education were easier if there was because Treloar was able to take you through these periods of transition?
Yeah, it was definitely easier thanks to the transition days that people were able to arrange. They're really good at gradually getting you used to things, so it's not as scary when you do go in.
So I think just to be clear, relatively few students would go all the way through from primary through to college. We have some students who would come for a 2-year placement or a 3-year placement before returning to a different setting. But we do have students, as Rachel said, who need to get support with that transition phase, particularly in their relations with local authorities, where there may be enthusiasm to fund a placement in a particular phase of education, but for example, a college placement may be something that the student and indeed their family may have to argue for. And I think making sure we've got the opportunity for all young people to access this type of education is crucial, because it's, as you know, I'm sure you've talked about it, those who are able to navigate through the complexities of the system that get here eventually. But I would just stress, I think we need to say as Treloars, and we're powerful advocates, I think, this isn't for everybody, and for where students can be included and properly supported in an accessible environment and their needs can be met, that's probably the best place for that young person with the right trained staff working with them. But for some students, the residential opportunity, it doesn't have to be, it's not 52 weeks a year for many, it can be just 5 days a week, it can be 7 days a week, but it can actually return people to the community much, much better equipped to deal with the complexities of daily life, to be able to advocate for themselves and access the local services that we liaise with on a daily basis to make sure that that return is successful. So coming to us is a bit of an intensive training program for getting back into mainstream life, if that's how you would describe it. And we're very, very integrated into communities, which may be a bit counterintuitive. I think many people see us as somewhere that people get sent to and then return subsequently. But the success rates of our students subsequent to Treloar's, which we track 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, and 10 years after they leave us, show that they really can make a contribution well beyond the time that they're with us, and we keep supporting them, albeit in an advocate sort of way, well beyond the time they're with us.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Sarah and Simon. I have a hand up from Ben Sutcliffe.
Thank you. Yeah, I know very well the fantastic work that at Trelawn's, and the confidence and independence is built within students there by the teaching staff. I'm just interested in planning for that transition into employment or higher education. What barriers you still face in moving from the environment of Trelawn's into a kind of community setting that all of us can help, and where do you think most work needs to be done to be able to make that transition?
Rachel, would you be able to answer? I mean, what sort of things have you had to do to prepare yourself for the next step into university life?
Well, in my university, it was easy. Probably the biggest challenge is self-advocating for myself when it comes to local authorities, but I know really well that tools have prepared me in the best way possible in order to be able to do that myself.
Yeah, so I think it's sometimes it's around the paperwork, and it depends very much on how much support a student would have from their family and how able they are to support the young person through things like applying for the appropriate grants that one needs in higher education. We need to go and do site visits to ensure that the accommodation, and some universities still struggle to provide the appropriate accommodation, the accessibility, and to provide students with the choice. Sometimes there is somewhere for them to stay, but it's quite a long way from everyone else. And then to make sure that the courses that are being offered are able to be taught in a way that the students can access, whether that's because of their particular challenge, their particular disability, or whether it's simply the sheer volume of students who are expected to attend things. And it isn't an answer for everybody to be in a lecture theatre, apart from the ex-Trelaw students sitting in their room watching it on Zoom. So I think we need to be careful of that being presented as an option, because the social benefits of going to a place with lots of other young people are clearly one of the main drivers for people going out there and growing up and maturing and living independently. I think some local authorities get it, and they really support families and young people to make that next step. For others, it's a real battle. And I think accommodation, housing, and the support that goes with that is crucial, because we have had students in the past that we've offered, we've offered employment to a young person, not one of our students who wanted to come and work here, but finding them accommodation somewhere near where we are, and we've got all that experience, was really, really hard and delayed them starting employment for many months. So I think it's getting somebody to have an overview of the whole package, getting the accommodation sorted out, and the access to employment, and any negotiation with local authorities around grant and benefit as well. So having sort of key workers with that overview. And just to finish off, I think the transition from child to adult services can be quite traumatic and difficult for some young people and their families too, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But you lose contact with some of the people who've been your advocate and support for such a long time. Somebody completely fresh with a different budget, with a smaller budget, potentially, has to then try and support you in the best way they can.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to ask? I did notice that Joanne had her hand up. Are you okay now? Has that been answered?
Simon Stevens is waving, I think.
Yeah, I just know there was somebody else on. Oh, she's left. Oh, okay. Well, over to you, Simon.
So you're on mute, Simon.
Oh, Simon. Yeah, on mute, Simon.
Do you mean Simon Yates? Or Simon Stevens?
It was Ben Sutcliffe mentioned that Simon had his hand up. Did any of the Simons want to ask a question? No. No. Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, thanks, Martin and Rachel. I mean, that just sounds like a wonderful place that you have there, and all the very best, Rachel, in your future endeavours. And I believe you have to leave leave the meeting now. So thank you so much for giving us your time today and talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye. And now I'm going straight over to Simon Yates. It's you now, Simon. Simon's head teacher at Cerebral Heritage School. So straight over to you.
Okay, hiya everyone. I have concerns about a certain portion of those with cerebral palsy who are not getting the education and opportunities they really should. As Paul said in his introduction, cerebral palsy is a huge, huge spectrum, and who I want to talk about are those who are the most complex physically, medically, visual impairments. At my school, we don't have any young people who could talk like the wonderful Rachel did. They're all in some sort of equipment all the time. They need nurses and doctors right by, ready to come running. Massive communication needs. And I see when I'm visiting other schools, I see pockets of children who are very similar, but there will generally be a class, whereas at Cerebral Heritage it's the whole school. So I don't know how familiar people are with the phrase PMLD. It's profound and multiple learning difficulties, which means it's a label, and labels aren't always good, but it means that the person is very physically disabled and needy, and also implies very low cognitive abilities. Now, this brings a very, very heartbreaking thing for me, to be honest, because in my school, they look like they are PMLD young people, in that they're non-verbal and they're in the wheelchair, they're in all the equipment, there's tubes everywhere, there's oxygen, what have you. But we have actually got a huge range of cognitive ability. So we have what we call young people with PMBL, sorry about all the abbreviate, the acronyms, whatever the word is, but profound and multiple barriers to learning. So these are bright kids, but who present very similarly to those who are very cognitively low. And at our school, we are intent on making sure that we are, sorry, there's a bird squeaking somewhere. Is everyone hearing that?
I can hear it. It's as if you're in an aviary somewhere there, Simon. Actually, I bought a cuckoo clock that's supposed to make that sound, and it isn't doing it at all. Actually, but that would have been lovely if it was mine.
Okay, sorry, that's put me off a bit, but basically, across the schools that I visit, and from what I've read and examples that I've known and case studies, there are young people who present as having profound and multiple learning difficulties, and who are then put onto what schools call things like a sensory pathway, and they're given loveliness, and it's nice like that, but actually in there, locked in there, is a brain that wants to learn to read, wants to learn how to tell the time, learn how to use money, wants to be like Rachel was. And they are not always recognized as that, because teachers don't always know how to tell, don't have the skills to observe and really find out about the child. Often these children are put into a group and nothing is then expected of them for their school career. Now, some young people are truly PMLD and who are pre-baby level, who very much do need a sensory type curriculum, but all too often I see young people who have got that spark, who are a Rachel, who really would benefit from proper education in terms of subject specific education, but they're stuck in that pathway from age 4 until they leave. And often I think some of these bright kids, they just turn off. Conversely, there are schools who have the very sensory young people, the very PMLD young people, but the senior leaders think wrongly that there's an expectation that national curriculum subject areas are taught. So we have young people who have no concept at all of anything really beyond themselves, but still the teachers have to shoehorn in geography and science and maths, and the teachers have to struggle ways to make the timetable look useful when they know it doesn't. So basically what I think we need is some sort of myth busting from the DFE or wherever of the need for national curriculum subjects to be taught to sensory learners. That would be an easy win. The new engagement model from the Rochford Review is quite clear on it, but senior leaders don't all seem to know. Also, I think there should be a requirement for special schools who do have children who present like this, who are very complex physically and mentally, medically, to have someone, at least someone trained or training in the educational practices required for these most complex learners. And I believe that SLT need an understanding of these needs. So often I'm told that, yeah, I would like to do this, I know the best thing for this child, but senior leaders say, no, you've got to do something else. Very quickly on Ofsted. Ofsted launched September, not last year, the year before, a new framework for inspecting, and it is led by subject-based deep dives. This has really reinforced to unconfident head teachers that they need to have subjects in place, even in very special schools. And that has really, really not helped. I think we need a debate with Ofsted on how subject-based deep dives may legitimately be managed in different ways in specialist settings, not just complex physical places, but also places like PRUs and social, emotional, mental health schools. I mean, when they come to inspect me, the day before, the afternoon before the inspection, they phone up, and the first thing that they do is decide which 4 subject areas they're going to lead on. I don't have any subject areas, so that's going to be an interesting conversation. And Ofsted inspectors need to be trained in having a curriculum conversation in special schools. There's not that many sufficiently trained inspectors, I don't think, at the complex end. And inspectors can't be expert in all types of special needs, but they need to be helped to be trained to have a curriculum conversation that is meaningful. And just sorry, a last part, I've missed out some of the points because of that bird squeaking in my ear. Paul at the beginning said, or was it you, Mary, said something about inclusive education. That means different things to different people. For my school, these children wouldn't be in education at all without what we've got in place in terms of doctors, nurses, all the rest of it. So in that sense, by having them in school, we have included them. Okay.
Thank you, Simon. I think this is my chance to hand over to the next speaker. But before I do, just my own observations on the issue. I went to Hopton Green Special School in the nursery department when I was younger, and I went with a lad called Alexis who had a very profound form of cerebral palsy that meant he was essentially tetraplegic. His parents ran the local pet shop in the town of Northwich, so we saw them quite often in and out of town. Alex recently finished his PhD, entirely using augmented and assistive technology. You know, he spent many, many years progressing his academic education. I'm not sure anyone at Hebden Green back around the turn of the 1980s saw his potential and his intellectual abilities, and all they saw, I think, was actually a keyboard. And so I think partly it shows how much things have moved forward, certainly, but also that, you know, the point someone made about teachers identifying the potential pupils have rather than just the boundaries that they have to overcome and the hurdles. So I would, you know, I mention Alexis at every opportunity I can. I'm sure Amanda's sick of hearing about him. He's well known in the augmented and assistive technology community as being the role model for what it can achieve. So I just echo everything Simon has said. But enough from me, and I now need to hand over, before I get into trouble, to Melanie Brown, who's the Chief Executive of Director of Services, rather, also for Conductive Education. And I think actually it should have been Mary introducing us. So I apologise to Mary. I'm not reading my briefing notes correctly, am I? So maybe Mary can introduce the next lady rather than me. But Melanie, over to you. Go away and read my notes again. Apologies.
Okay, and thank you, Paul. It was a great introduction anyway. Thanks for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm going on a slightly different slant, I think, because I don't want to just talk about NICE where I work, but just give a little bit of the approach of conductive education as a way of teaching and learning. Give a little bit of my background. So I've been at NICE since 1987. And I went from teaching in a UK special school over to Hungary, where conductive education originates, and I trained in it there. So what I really want to do is just focus on CE. I accept that CE isn't necessarily for everyone. So I just want to give it as a model, and I think parts of that can be applicable across a whole range of settings, not just uniquely in conductive education. But at NICE, we have a range of services, around 250 families a year, and we go from babies of 6 months right through to late adulthood. But we are just one of over 30 centres or schools delivering conductive education in the UK. To date, there is around 100 qualified, we call them conductors, and over 1,000 children and adults with cerebral palsy accessing CE. And they're accessing it across a range of settings, be it schools, specific centres, or even within their own homes. We also train people within conductive education in the UK, and that's been around since 1997. So although conductive education started in Hungary, it's well embedded in this country, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But just looking at really where it's coming in from in relation to cerebral palsy. So we're built on the assumption that the damaged nervous system can be overcome if we're using specialised learning strategies, and that the nervous system, as we all know now, of course, will generate new neural pathways. But fundamentally, I think where conductive education is coming in potentially perhaps a sideways way, is that it sees it as a problem of teaching and learning, which is rather than a medical diagnosis, which is compromising the person. So it's looking at cerebral palsy as a problem of teaching and learning. And I think that's critical in the way that we look at it. And that means then teaching the person how to create these neural pathways. And that's going to be different for every individual. And where their starting point is different, the ending point's different, as it is for all of us on the screen today. But one of our major beliefs is that it's the teaching techniques which are fundamental to this. So this isn't just looking at the problem as how the person learns, but more fundamentally, how are they taught? I think that links a little bit to some of the things Simon was just saying about the training of people and the teaching. So conductors themselves then are taught across a range of disciplines which are not usually put together in the UK system. So disciplines of teaching, of pedagogy, science of teaching, human movement, neurology, psychology, as well as the impact of the conditions, the diagnosis on learning. And of course, that's going to be multifaceted. So specialising, if you like, in the nature and impact of the diagnosis rather than a method which is then applied across to a range of different people. So it is a slightly different angle than perhaps we traditionally look at. So in practice, what does that give you? It's going to give you an approach which centralises the person. So looking at the person with cerebral palsy, what do they want to learn? What do they need to learn? We can't always only learn what we want to, of course. What strategies they might need to help create potential, and including that across the spectrum of human development, your physical, your communication, your social, daily challenges. So looking at addressing those areas simultaneously, based on the fact that each one is interrelated. So if I actually learn orientation of my body awareness, that's going to improve my ability to learn to read and to write. To be able to move around is going to improve my ability to understand time rather than read a clock. So we're looking at saying all elements of learning are intertwined, and if we separate them, we're potentially capping one against the other. So more crucially as well, within conductive education, one professional is trained not to know everything, that's impossible, but to in effect to coordinate and deliver that approach. And conductors work in many, many different settings, in multidisciplinary teams and alongside a whole range of other professionals. But it is within the system where we draw all those in and come up with a common approach, taking into account a whole range of expertise in doing that. So for children, that might mean embedding the therapy into the classroom. So having a real life situation, there's a reason for learning to hold on to something. It's because I want to do art with everybody else, or I want to eat my dinner with everybody else. So making movement meaningful, making it real, and embedding that into the daily curriculum, preventing then the need for children to come out of a classroom situation for therapeutic input, then perhaps going back in the classroom. I've missed some of my curriculum that my friends might have been involved in, and I'm not sure what's been going on. And B, does anybody know what I've been doing? And am I disturbing the class when I come back to tell everybody? So by actually integrating it, you are giving the young people a reason and an understanding of why movement is even desirable, never mind a part of them as a person. For adults, it's going exploring their movements, developing problem-solving skills. We know that as we go through life, and I think we've all learned that in the last 15 months, we need skills we never knew we needed. And so these young people are the same. So you can't learn everything that you need for life in childhood. You actually need that input. So of course, an adult with cerebral palsy may need to learn a new skill, whereas you and I might be able to problem solve it. They might need some additional support to do that. And that is absolutely essential to help people to move forward. So that's where conductive education is coming in, if you like, merging what they want to do, also how we feel about ourselves. We all know that impacts on our everyday desires, our mindset, and helping people to not be defined by the disability, really. And again, I think Simon alluded to that. So don't define them by the disability, but your personality and your potential. How do we know what potential is inside us? We don't, but with the right learning environment, it's a key factor in providing that. So conductive education focuses very much on the teacher and the learning environment and maximising those to help the person make sense of the world they live in, who they are within that, and more critically, of course, who they can be and become. So crudely, I suppose I say conductors are joining the dots, perhaps across our more traditional disciplines. I think certainly my experience, a lot of the people I work with are almost split into boxes, and each part of them goes to a different professional, and the boxes are sort of clubbed together at the end of the day inside them, with some support and help by integrating those. It prevents confusion, but also is meaningful. We don't split ourselves up in real life, so why should they? So an educational approach in a way to what perhaps is more frequently defined as a medical condition, rather than education and a problem of learning. Most of the people coming to conductive education do that because of that environment, and getting that the environment which believes in them, gives them opportunities to develop skills, as many other places do. So critically, I think it is the training that's important. Specialist training in cerebral palsy is very rare in the UK. And I've come across many situations in schools and in other settings where the people working with our young people actually don't know what diagnosis they have. They've not been told. And even if they are told, and through no fault of theirs, they don't know what the implication of that is on learning. So it's trying to just you know, from our point of view, trying to come in and say training. I think if I had to give one message to this group today, and that is the training of professionals. Autism is way ahead of us in relation to that. Cerebral palsy is becoming the poor relation in relation to understanding from educationalists, and a whole range of other professionals, of course. No fault of theirs, but I think a fault of the system, and we should really address. In just to give a bit of context of conductive education, when it was in Hungary, £1.75 million was given from the UK government to help people access it. Charities like myself and many others across the UK work tirelessly to get it back to Britain, only to find that the families who then want it end up in a tribunal to try and access it. Again, I would say, I think generally, and I think that's across a whole range of settings which are perhaps independent or outside of the system, I think the fact that families have to fight for a specialism, I find quite sad. That you have to fight for a specialist system that looks at cerebral palsy and understands cerebral palsy. And of course, for many parents, it means it's inaccessible for that reason. So I think, again, perhaps parental choice, understanding, and say conductive education isn't for everybody. I absolutely know that, but it is a real choice that people can have if they can get the support to do that. Equally, flip that the other side, and I think that whole focus on training professionals, creating that learning environment, and fundamentally, as Paul just said, belief in the person. None of us have any idea what these young people are capable of, and therefore have no right to cap that during their educational journey. And I learned, most of my learnings happened since school, I have to say, and I guess that's the same for most people. But of course, their services sadly stop when they leave school, and also their ability to access education, unless they can fit in a higher education system, also stops. So our belief that they can still learn is questionable, and I would certainly question that. So yeah, that's conductive education. We have transformative pedagogy, focusing at the neurological level, so looking at where the challenges are, and helping people just to achieve what you and I have the opportunity to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. I just wanted to say, I came across conductive education when Maria, my daughter, was a baby, and it was a physiotherapist who she'd had some training, and she offered Maria conductive education as a 1-year-old, and she'd done it and she called it movement education. It was just using parts of it. And Maria loved it, but then it was the school that she was offered to go to, they didn't offer conductive education. So we'll never know whether it would have had a greater impact on her life or not. But yeah, I certainly enjoyed it anyway, sitting in the group work with Maria. Yeah. Did anyone have any questions for Melanie before we move on? And Paul, it's your turn next.
So I was trying to ask you a question, actually.
Right.
Conductive education, can someone just explain to me why sometimes it seems, why is there such controversy over its impact? Because I mentioned it to some people and they pull an awful face at me as though it's equivalent to homeopathy or crystals. Just wondered what your views were on why that started dividing the approach to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to pinpoint. I think when it first came over from Hungary, it came over in a blast of media publicity. And a lot of the parents that went to Hungary, it almost a little bit of a pilgrimage to look for something better. And of course, that challenged and rocked the system back here. And I think that did cause some controversy. It is a different approach. So if you're looking educationally at something and you're looking medically at something, there are going to be some professional discussions. I would say a lot of the controversy that we're still seeing now is historical. I don't think it's current at all. And there's many, many examples where conductors are part of multidisciplinary environments. We're in very good and engaging and challenging professional discussions. But when it first came over, parents were, there was a lot, remember, there was a lot less available for people with cerebral palsy in the late 80s, as you probably know yourself. And I think it came over, it actually rocked our system in the UK, it challenged it, and potentially people don't like being challenged. So I think it was a little bit of that, but I would absolutely, my experience, I mean, I've been there since the beginning, I've been in some horrendous, challenging, controversial situations, rarely come across it now. The major fight now is financial to get the service available.
Thank you, that's an interesting insight. So now introducing Guy Caesar, who is the project manager at PDNet, which I have looked in my briefing to explain what PDNet was. It doesn't tell me. So Guy is about to tell us what PDNet is. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Thank you very much. Could we move? I have to explain, I'm in a place with poor internet access. So could we move on with the slide, please? PDNet, look it up, that's the website. First of all, I'm delighted that PDNet has been invited to join this APPG. For those of you who've not come across PDNet, it stands for Physical Disability Network. We're a free to join organisation. We have over 6,250 members. Of these, 75% work in schools or educational settings. They support learners from 0 through to 25 years in both special and mainstream settings. Data about this learner population is scarce. The DFE data 2020 suggests that there's approximately 37,500 learners with physical disability in the education system. Now that is learners that have physical disability as a primary need. It doesn't include learners that Simon Yates spoke about with PMLD. It doesn't include learners that may have autism and CP. It doesn't include learners with cognition and learning needs that may be in a special school. Of those learners, 68% have an education, health and care plan, and about 32% are at school support on the code of practice. Data from PDNet, we conducted 2 national benchmarking audits, suggests that 83% of those learners attend a mainstream placement. And that means that every year, 3,000 learners with physical disability will start school for the first time. 6,000 will move on to secondary school or a new post-16 setting. It means that approximately 29,500 every September will move to a new class or a new teacher to make an in-year transition. So using data presented to the APPG and based on 30,000 learners with cerebral palsy, it suggests that of those 37,500 learners that we know of, approximately 2/3-ish will have cerebral palsy. So recutting the data, that means that every single year, 2,000 children will start reception class with CP, 6,000 will move to secondary school or post-16, and 20,000 make an in-year transition. A little bit about PDNet and our aims are on there. If we can move on, please. We want each and every one of these learners to achieve a positive learning journey. achieve their potential to be as independent as possible. Indeed, we're not the only people that think this. Over a decade ago, the National College of School Leadership says we want all children, they have a right to achieve their potential. However, the data is chilling. Can we move on? There are risks to being in the education system. At the age of 14, 30% of disabled children have a mental health problem diagnosed. It rises to over 70% at the age of 21, data from the Papworth Trust, 2018 and 2020. 4 times more likely to be abused. 17% report being bullied at school. They're 3 times more likely to leave school with no qualifications, twice as likely not to be in education, training, or employment post 16. If every child, if every young person, if every learner with cerebral palsy is to achieve their potential, things need to change so that all schools, special and mainstream, are better able to successfully include learners with physical disability, better able to deliver personalised learning, better able to understand the type of approach that Melanie was talking about, that ortho function of actually having a child's needs met holistically. Could we move on, please? It's hard, isn't it, to get it right? Because we're not talking about processes. Somebody mentioned autistic spectrum, autism. You know, every child is an individual, but a learner with PD, even more so. Their individual needs, their aspirations, their requirements are going to be very, very different. And for schools and for teachers, this can be challenging. Could we move on, please? When we're looking at what would be best practice for teaching and learning, you're right. Mary, Paul, Simon, Melanie, you've all talked about the impacts of cerebral palsy and its impact on learning. Let's just have a look, if we could just click through this. The impact of cerebral palsy for many, many teachers. They would think that cerebral palsy is a physical thing, affecting a leg, an arm, a limb. They don't understand that it's complex, that its effects are subtle, that they may affect every aspect of life 24/7. Let's move on and have a look at understanding the impact of cerebral palsy on teaching, on learning and attainment. The consequences, once again, cognitively, memory difficulties, processing speed, gaps. Could we click through, please? Now, teachers, you know, at the moment, Whole School Send hold the DFE contract. Their mantra is every school, a school for SEND, every teacher, a teacher of SEND. And a lot of work has gone into skilling up schools so that they are better able to include learners with a range of SEND. However, when we're talking about cerebral palsy, we're needing a bespoke approach, an approach that takes account of what the learner wants, what their parents want, that takes account of their learning preferences, their learning styles. Teacher may know about memory difficulties, may know about cognitive difficulties, but when we're looking at cerebral palsy, needs attention, distractibility, gaps. There's a lot to know. it's hard for teachers. PDNet, that mainstream teachers rarely encounter a learner with physical disability. We estimate it's once in every 4 years. A large primary school, about small primary schools in rural areas, probably once in every 8 years. Lots of these schools are so well intentioned. However, it means that even with the best will in the world, schools lack experience, they lack skills, they lack CPD and training. And this means that they can struggle to deliver their responsibilities as teachers. What's missing in the sector is not what do we need to do, but how do we do it? What practically is going to work? What practically is going to have an impact so those risks are reduced and outcomes for learners improved? May we go on, please? The SEND codes of practice was really clear. Teachers need to be accountable for the progress and development of their learners, to work with the child on a daily basis. Interventions at the right time. They need to work closely with TAs and specialist staff and their parents. They don't know how to do this. Voice of a learner who has a different voice. Managing, could we move the, oh, is it? Can you hear me now? Okay. PDNet has come up with a very simple model based on Maslow's hierarchy of need, which actually helps schools to understand what needs to be put in place before a child with CP or physical needs is ready to learn. First of all, their physical needs need to be met. This is most important. They need to be met so they're as safe and physically healthy as possible. Their therapeutic needs are met, their equipment needs are met. Once that's in place, the learner needs to feel truly welcome in school. Their social and emotional needs need to be met. They need to have a voice which is heard and listened to. They need to be able to build relationships with others, their peers, their friends, their support staff, the sports coach, midday supervisor. They need to be able to have friends and not feel alone. Pupil voice feedback to PDNet is often learners feel alone. Only when physical needs are met and social, emotional needs are met is the child, is the learner, is the young person with CP really in a place where they're really ready to learn. Could you move it on, please? I'll try and speed up a bit. So some of the things in making physical needs safe, carrying those are some of those things that need to be there. Moving on, in terms of physical needs, the next slide, please. That can be very challenging for a school if a child's got a lot of equipment. Moving on. Safe. Let's look at the challenges for the teacher. It's not enough just to be at school, you need to be included, actively taking part, able to access the environment, able to use your equipment, able to take part in what's going on, knowing that your needs are met, knowing that you've got a way of recording things, being as independent as possible, being able to take part in what's going on. Big challenges. There's a very nice little video at that link there where you can, with CP Charlotte, accessing a mainstream education and some of her opinions. Can we move on? Lots of challenges for school teachers. We've spoken about those. Can we move on, please? So how are we going to do this? How are we going to get it so those 30,000 learners with CP, risks are reduced, potential is facilitated? We think there needs to be more sharing of good practice. We think that there needs to be a strengthening of specialist support, strengthening of CPD opportunities for all teachers, and strengthening of training. It's an irony, isn't it, that there is no mandatory qualification for teaching the most complex children with physical needs, and yet there are VI, visual impairment, hearing impairment, multisensory impairment. We think that the community of practice, we should be strengthened, working together, sharing good practice. And in the national SEND arena, the DFE, at the moment, Whole School SEND has their the contract for delivering support to schools, so they're better able to teach those with SEND. But LISEN, low incidence needs, special education needs for physical disability or sensory, that section of the code of practice, we fall outside of those contracts. And so there are no opportunities at present to really bid for national funding to really provide more support. So those are things that we think need to change. Just to conclude, PDNet runs an annual pupil voice competition. This was this year's winner, Harrison. He's a lad who has muscular dystrophy, Duchenne's, and our competition was really about the impact of lockdown and reaching for the rainbow. Harrison was supported by the Rochdale Additional Needs Service during the 16 months he's had at home, where he didn't really leave home at all. He was provided with a Surface Pro, which he could use via keyboard, touchscreen and pen. He loved art, but was no longer able to do it. But over lockdown, he took to it and has produced a range of pictures. And this one is based on the style of Banksy. And to me, there is a resonance. This is a really good metaphor of what we really need to change, of how nationally support could be better for learners with CP. Thank you very much. Bye, Caesar.
Thank you for that, Di. Do we have any questions? I think for me it was the question I was going to ask earlier, but you've highlighted was about how to share best practice, and that's actually quite remarkable that there isn't the CPD mandatory qualification. That's just outrageous, really. So I don't know whether there's anyone has any thoughts or any actions that we know of that, or is there any work going on nationally to ensure that that can happen in the future? No.
We have level 1 training, which is free. Can you hear on PD? We just launched level 2, which is around supporting learners with PD, but that's as far as it's got. I mean, I do think there does need to be more training, and it needs to be easily accessible. One of the stoppers is around recognition of low incidence special educational needs within the DFE. We are doing some work with NatSIP, but there's an awful long way to go. But for learners with CP, 30,000, it's really integral to their learning pathway. Teachers, that their support staff are knowledgeable, and that it's knowledge really, echoing.
Thank you for that, Di. Can I just hand now over to Amanda for Amanda Richardson, Chief Executive of Action Cerebral Palsy, just for your thoughts, please, and comments on today's session.
Yes, thank you, Mary. You know, as usual, it's been incredibly interesting to listen to those really superb presentations from the speakers, all of which have brought so much valuable information to the group. For me, I think listening to you and also talking to the many parents that we have done over the years, is the key areas, I think, in terms of teaching and learning, and also the broader aspect of the educational provision and planning for children with cerebral palsy, is this point which so many of you have spoken about, is that quality of expertise, the expertise that is necessary to really hit the nail on the head for each and every one of our pupils. And we talk about the multidisciplinary team working within a setting, or looking at how that multidisciplinary team can provide that expert assessment of the child's needs. Unfortunately, those truly expert multidisciplinary teams are so few and far between that it's very rare for a child to be able to have, first of all, start with that excellent assessment and then go on to a provision that actually can provide it. And within that team, you know, I'm also cannot stress the importance of people who understand that holistic, the holistic nature of cerebral palsy, the way that sensory movement affects learning and emotional well-being, language, communication, the whole package. It is that multifaceted, holistic nature of cerebral palsy that we must understand better. So I totally support Di and all the others who have called on us to improve access to teaching and learning training for children with cerebral palsy. And actually, you know, as a teacher myself, I have to say, actually, it's not that quality of observation and insight and analysis for the individual learner is the quality of a good teacher. It's what every teacher needs to know. It's simply more perhaps looking for those more subtle and complex signs for the student with a neurological disorder such as cerebral palsy. And the second point that I want to make, and it is linked to this access to expertise, is can we please be more, much more open to looking at providing that breadth of offerings for our children and young people with cerebral palsy. Like every child, their needs change across their stages and across their development. And surely it is within the power of our system to enable those families without the battle, simply to access what is right for their child at the right time in their life. We talked in some of the previous sessions about early intervention, the absolute critical importance of capturing that neuroplasticity. So then and there, those early months and years, that importance of intensive intervention to help that child with cerebral palsy understand their body better, to learn those basic skills that you were talking about, Di, in terms of being ready for school, ready for learning. But then to go on to the type of setting which best meets that child's needs. And I have worked with hundreds of children across my career, and we have always supported the family, the child and their families, to see what is right for that child at that point in life. And that might be a very specialist setting for a specific period, in order to then move into a mainstream setting or a less specialist setting. And that also has the added advantage of mixing those skill sets, because professionals, teachers, therapists, conductors across the range of education for children with cerebral palsy have so much to learn from each other. And we absolutely should be looking at co-delivery, co-sharing, the sharing of skills between sectors, whether that is the state sector, the independent sector, the charitable sector, voluntary sector. We should be sharing those skills because they exist there. We don't need to start from scratch with our training of the workforce, because the workforce, many of them already have those skills, but we do need to work harder to bring those skills together and share without a sense of compartmentalizing, if you like, or discrimination between the different sectors. So I would say that, you know, we have the potential to make some changes. We already have the expertise within the system. We simply need to share that better with our colleagues who are not specialists perhaps, but who may encounter, you know, those statistics that Di gave us. It is actually quite likely that every student teacher coming out of college will encounter a child with cerebral palsy within their career, and they really need to know how to address those skills. So I think we need to be much more creative and much more innovative in terms of how we share those skills across the sector, the special SEND sector and the mainstream sector, so that every child can move on through their school life. Really, it is about the end result. It is about leaving school and being able to lead a fulfilling adult life, but it's also about enjoying and getting the most from their school days. It is so important we don't waste those children's time. And unfortunately, I do feel there is a lot of time that is wasted in trying to put the right packages together for those children. Time that is absolutely precious and those children cannot afford to lose. And that's when those systems do not integrate properly, and you do not have that communication, and you do not have that urgency and need to bring those agencies together, all of those agencies that are responsible. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to everyone. It's been so interesting to listen to you, and really, you know, on behalf of the APPG, to urge you to really think about those key changes that we need to ask for, that we need to put forward, the easy reach ones, if you like, but also perhaps some of the more tricky ones that we need to consider as we look forward to providing a better opportunities for those young people with cerebral palsy. Thank you.
Paul?
Mary?
Anyway, I was trying to check whether there were any questions in the chat. There aren't. And the person I wanted to ask a question of has disappeared. That's Adi from CP Sports. I might ask Amanda this. So we've talked a lot about education today, and all the ways in which teachers need to pay attention to the, if you like, intellectual skills that come through education. But education is about more than just learning things. It's about developing as a human being, and part of that involves physical activity of some sort, but depending, of course, on the extent of the CP that an individual has. And does Amanda, or did anybody on the call have a view on how physical activity teaching can be improved in schools? You know, CP Sport is a great organisation. It's amazing how much it does, and giving people who may not have had a good experience in school of sporting opportunity. I certainly had no chance to participate in organised sport at all. I ran away from the ball in rugby, petrified of how to catch it. It's a very broad question, I suppose. What role does sport have in the education of those with cerebral palsy, if any? Discuss.
Well, I think Addie is probably better placed to answer.
She's gone now. She's left for another meeting.
Oh no. Well, I think it comes back to that question of innovative thinking for our teachers. And, you know, I think we've all heard the stories you've just, you know, said that, Paul, but, you know, where the child on sports day, child with cerebral palsy in the wheelchair is
I was banned.
you know, they're in charge of the whistle. Which, you know, perhaps is a great responsibility for them, but perhaps not exactly the one that they wanted for that day. But I do think, I'm not a specialist at the moment, but I think we probably, again, it's about sharing of those skills, and where one of the things that I am concerned about is the reduction in specialist teachers in local authorities, specialist PD teachers in local authorities. I know our personal, well, my authority local to me, you know, disbanded their specialist teaching service, and the first one to go was the specialist teacher for physical impairment. And that really what is worrying, because it is those individuals perhaps who may move between schools and may have those ideas that they can share with teachers. You know, and it is true, not every teacher can be a specialist teacher. They need support and they need help and they need those ideas. But also don't forget the parents. If you want to know how to include a child in an activity, ask their mum or dad, because they will absolutely know. They do that every day as part of their family life. So, you know, and I think somebody's made a comment there, let's not forget the role of the parents, because my God, are they the experts? If you're in doubt, ask the parents.
Though someone has just mentioned bocce, I noticed. They always get a bit worried that bocce is the default offer. I have to say, I have played bocce with my local bocce team here in Blackpool. They whipped me something rotten. I cannot play bocce to save my life. It's embarrassing, such molecular coordination. But I think it's a key point that it relies upon the parents to push for it. But if it's not available in a local area, there is nothing to push for in the first place. So it's a question, it's very much one of the transition issues. If it's not in the educational offer, then it gets lost the moment they leave the educational system. And so in early adult life, those opportunities to experience as wide a range of experiences as possible simply aren't there. But to me, it's a really interesting area. I hope the APPG will get to look on a bit more as to what happens post-16, not just in professional opportunities, but in the wider life experiences and life quality of young people. And now all the hands are shot up, sorry. You're going to be tall now.
Di's got a hand up to come in, and so is Simon.
And so is Joanne, and so.
All right, let's see what you've started there, Paul. Okay, Di?
Just a quickie. I'm always interested in the dichotomy between so many young people with PD, doing sport, achieving really, really well at sport outside of school. And then you ask them, what do they do in school? And they'll often say physio or catch-up lessons. I noticed that the DFE invited expressions of interest. I believe they're looking to rewrite the PE curriculums to make it more opportunities for SEND. One of the things is, I'll be entirely honest, we did submit a tender with another organisation. We haven't heard anything yet, but you know what will happen will be a generic contract, and once again those opportunities to make a difference for learners with CP get lost. Hope that makes sense.
Simon.
Oh yeah, just putting a word in again in case we're forgetting about the most complex end of cerebral palsy disability. The role of sport, great, but the amount of times I've felt desperation when there's some young person put at the end of a bocce tube, well, a TA or a supporter moves their hand, move the balls onto it, flicks it down, and then everyone cheers. And that's just one example. Really has to be thought through. And just moving slightly away from sport, with our very PMLD older young people, once we've done everything we can to make sure that they are PMLD and we haven't missed anything. We've moved on to a curriculum based around, I think the phrase we came up with was enhancing their capacity to experience joy. So it's all around finding out what they like, finding out what they don't like, giving them all sorts of opportunities. And yeah, I mean, a lot of them, it depends on keeping them out of pain in the first place. And then we've moved into something we call independence by proxy. So we have absolutely detailed documents of everything that they enjoy, don't enjoy, what makes their day good, what makes their day bad. And wherever they're going on to, we pass that on so that they have a head start. And that's down to, you know, favorite flavor and brand of toothpaste. It's minutely detailed, but it's all we can do. And once we've handed them on, if it's into some sort of home, we can't control whether they use it or not. But sort of ethically, we're trying our very best to give those young people the best rest of their lives.
Thank you. I see, is it Joanne has a hand up also?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I talking to the late PD net, I mean, I think there are some really acute threats to meeting the needs of young people with physical disability currently, particularly in mainstream settings. I mean, I'm a parent carer, and my young man came through conductive education, and his therapy was integrated in the whole day curriculum. But then he moved into a mainstream setting where therapy wasn't integrated. And what's interesting, there doesn't seem to be any directive in new builds in mainstream schools to have a room for bespoke therapy packages, physio, OT, speech and language therapy. And sometimes that therapy does need to be implemented on a one-to-one, intensive, focused, and particularly for monitoring purposes. And often young people are embarrassed to do that in a classroom. But what seems to be happening is with the rise of, you know, there's a massive focus on autism and children with behavioural difficulties. A lot of those small areas, sometimes broom cupboards, where perhaps a physiotherapy program could be implemented, have been turned into sensory rooms. And I think sensory rooms have taken over some of the nooks and crannies in old schools, and new builds don't necessarily include facilities to implement physiotherapy, speech and language therapy and occupational therapy programs. And I think that's a real threat. And I think there needs to be a directive from the top that, you know, that for young people with physical disability and children, that there needs to be, you know, adequate spaces within schools to meet their needs. The other thing that I think is also a threat is that, you know, physical disability resource spaces, because cuts, you know, are now becoming hand disability, which leads to a dilution in the specialism and expertise around physical disability. So I think that's another threat, you know, as are all cuts to specialist provision as well, and lack of specialist places. So, you know, there's a real sustainability issue. So just that those are a few points that I wanted to make.
Thank you. Well, it seems, looking in the chat there, that's raised quite a fair few comments there, Paul. So maybe it's something that we look at, the group looks at a little bit further in a future topic, physical activity. Yeah.
Philip Lee had a question, just Philip Lee's hand was waving at us.
Yeah. Simon Yates, I don't want to be disagreeing with you, and I know Chailey is a spectacular place, and you know, you've got a wonderful new swimming pool and things like that going on, although it meant knocking down the old swimming pool, which was designed by my father-in-law. But you somewhat decried boccia, and certainly my experience of that was through Trelaws, which Trelaws used to produce fabulous bocce players who did a hell of a lot, well, did everything for themselves. And particularly, I think of one student, David Smith, who won a number of Paralympic golds, whose background and life story would have been so different had he not had the opportunity of playing bocce to international Paralympic standard. And Treloar's had the imagination and skills to develop something in him, which has been beneficial for him. He's now subsequently got a degree in aeronautical engineering. You know, for somebody who was born next to the railway in Eastleigh to become what he has become was in large part because of the opportunities he had at Treloar's school and college.
Sorry, Phil, not decrying bocce at all, but if it's not meaningful to the young person, if cognitively they have don't know what they're doing, then there's probably something better that they could be doing. But no, bocce in itself is absolutely brilliant, and some of our young people who do compete have the most fantastic time. Yeah. But for the most complex, it doesn't make any connections to them, bring them any joy, and that goes for quite a few other sports as well. We've got wonderfully switch controlled table cricket, which we've built ourselves, which is fantastic. But if you don't know that it's you pressing the switch to make the bat go, then it's not meaningful. And we're very big on meaningful at Chailey.
Yeah, I've visited Chailey a number of times, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place. I'm not being patronising saying that. I do understand you need to engage pupils who have real difficulties, and you do so spectacularly.
Thank you. I think if there are no other questions, is Joanne, is that a historical hand or is your hand up again?
That's a new hand. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about, I know somebody mentioned creativity in the curriculum. I think there needs to be, I think that's something that needs to be looked at carefully, because there is this constant drive towards focusing on functional skills, maths and English. And for some of, young people with cerebral palsy, maths and English, their functional ability in maths and English plateaus. And then the education switches towards focusing on life skills. And, I think sometimes the curriculum lacks imagination, it lacks fun and creativity. And some of those learners who could potentially, learn great things around general knowledge, etc., become disengaged learners because there's this constant drive to try and push up their maths and push up their English, which may have plateaued, but there's an awful lot more they're capable of learning. And straight away then it flips over to I think it's important they learn how to cook and they learn independent skills, but I think sometimes that lacks aspiration to continue with their learning beyond maths and English. And I think the curriculum needs to be developed for those learners.
I couldn't agree more. I know that my sister, she teaches with special needs, and it's the music and the art and the drama and those subjects that really help the young people to learn with the maths and English, and that has been weakened over recent years. Anyway, if there's nothing else, Paul, if you don't mind, then if I'd just like to thank the speakers. Thank you to the speakers and the audience, and apologies for a few difficulties at the beginning with the mute button, and for the nightingales and larks or whatever who were interrupting Simon's presentation. So can I just say that the APPG are going to publish their a report on its 3rd and 4th meetings in October. So the call for evidence for this report is open now until the 30th of July. So you can email the Cerebral Palsy APPG at connectpa.co.uk, and I'm sure that will be in that information will be sent to you, or visit Action Cerebral Palsy's website. And the next meeting will be on the 7th of September, and we have Caroline Noakes who will be joining us, and Stephen Timms MP will be coming along to the meeting in November. So thank you once again, everybody, all the speakers and the audience. You've been fantastic as usual. And have a nice summer, I think. Is that right then, if I'm seeing you in September? Have a nice summer. I certainly hope it's better than it is here today in Durham. It's rained non-stop for the past.
It's sunny in Blackpool, but then it always is sunny in Blackpool. So you can all come here for your holidays.
Right.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all in September. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.